Welcome. I'm Harold Holzer. I'm the director of Roosevelt House, and I want to welcome you on behalf of Hunter President Ann Kirshner. And thank you all for braving the rain to join us in person. I know there are many more on Zoom, whom we welcome also. And I want to welcome our amazing speakers this evening. I kind of wish I didn't have to welcome them. I wish we didn't have to present this program. I wish there was an open avenue for all books everywhere all the time, but it's never been more urgent to expose and probe the subjects of book censorship, book banning, and inhibitions on free expression. So we're very proud to have all of them with us today. Adriana Herrera, Vicki Johnson, Kyle Lukoff, and Boon Lin Neo, who will talk to us today about their publishing histories and what the horizon for free expression looks like here and elsewhere now and in the future. I'm going to leave the formal and detailed introductions to our moderator, Erin Mayo Adam, who has convened this session and is the director of the LGBTQ Policy Center here at Roosevelt House. And I will do a little bit of introduction of Erin because she teaches in our public policy program. She's a member of the Roosevelt House faculty, and she also serves as an assistant professor in the Hunter Political Science Department in her spare time. Her major life is here at Roosevelt House, I hope. Among her books is Queer Alliances, How Power Shapes Political Movement Formation. She's written articles in scholarly journals. She attends programs and meetings around the country, and she is a treasured teacher who this semester is teaching a class here in the House. And we love the semesters when the LGBTQ program is actually here on site in the present and bringing students. So we're proud and grateful to have her expertise, her energy, and her convening power, which is on display here at Roosevelt House tonight. So now, without further ado, I want to turn the program over to Professor Erin Mayo Adam.
Thank you so much, Harold, and welcome everyone to tonight's event. So before we begin, I guess what I'd like to do is just introduce each of our amazing speakers a little bit more. Introduce in alphabetical order. So first we have Adriana Herrera, who's a USA best-selling and audio award-winning author who was born and raised in the Caribbean. She is the author of more than 20 romance novels and anthologies, many of which feature LGBTQ and Afro-Latinx characters. Her books include American Dreamer, a Today Show best read, and about a food truck owner who moves to upstate New York and falls in love with a librarian. The New York Times has praised one of her books as, quote, sweet, thoughtful, and delightfully filthy too, unquote. And she's also a trauma therapist in New York City, working with survivors of domestic violence and sexual violence. So welcome, Adriana. And next we have Vicki Johnson. Vicki Johnson is a children's book author and a 2022 Lambda Literary Fellow. Her debut picture book, Molly's Tuxedo, is a 2024 National Council of Teachers of English Charlotte Huck Award for Outstanding Fiction for Children. And Molly's Tuxedo was illustrated by Gillian Reed and published by Little Bee Books in June of 2023. She is a first-generation graduate of Smith College and Emory University Law School and studied writing for children and young adults at Vermont College of Fine Arts. So welcome, Vicki. And next we have Kyle Lukoff. Kyle is the author of many books for young readers. His debut middle grade novel, Too Bright to See, received a Newbery Honor and the Stonewall Award and was a National Book Award finalist. His picture book, When Aiden Became a Brother, also won the Stonewall Award, and his book, Call Me Max, has been banned in schools across the country. He has forthcoming books and about apologies, death, unicycles, and many other topics. While becoming a writer, he worked for 10 years as a bookseller and another 9 as a school librarian. So we welcome Kyle as well. And finally, we have Boon Lin Yo, who was born and raised in Malaysia and is currently teaching at Hunter College in the Women and Gender Studies Department. Boon is a prolific writer of more than 40 books and numerous bestsellers in Malaysia and is the country's first openly gay Christian minister. One of the most sought-after speakers in LGBTI Chinese communities in Asia, he was instrumental in establishing more than 15 LGBTI Christian fellowships and churches in mainland China and Malaysia. His activism has been reported on by CNN and the New York Times, and he has been named one of the most inspiring LGBT religious figures in the world by the Huffington Post. And his book, Gay is Okay, A Christian Perspective, was banned by the Malaysian government in 2020. He challenged the ban in the High Court and won the case in February of 2022, but the government filed an appeal in March of 2022, and by a 2-to-1 decision in September of last year, the government's ban on the book was restored. And Boon is, of course, currently appealing this, and will tell us more about this incident this evening. So for tonight's event, I've prepared a series of questions. So what I thought I'd do is just start with some general questions, and I have then some specific questions for each of the authors. And that in the last 15 minutes, we'll go ahead and open it up for audience Q&A. So I guess we'll just get started. So I thought we'd just begin by having each panelist explain what genre or genres they write in and what drew each of you to write books that feature LGBTQ characters and or experiences. Yeah.
Hello? Oh, we are. So I write for the age groups pre-K through third, which is picture books, and then ages 8 to 12, which is middle grade. So the genre I write in is sort of contemporary realistic fiction. As for why I write LGBTQ characters, it sort of never occurred to me not to. I think at least for myself as a writer, I mind my personal experiences and those of people around me and in my family and friendships, and that's sort of where the emotionality of my writing comes from, or my experiences as a queer person. So
I write adult romance, predominantly queer romance. I mean, I would say probably like 60% of my books have queer characters or queer protagonists. And I write contemporary and I write historical also. So my latest series is a historical fiction series set in 1889 in Paris, and dabble in paranormal. But yeah, romance.
I used to say that I wrote for everyone except for teenagers, but I'm writing my first young adult novel now, which means that my books are going to span from babies up through adolescence. And then the question about why I write LGBTQ characters is honestly because I fundamentally do not know what it is like to be straight and or cis. Like, that sounds like a joke, but I came out as gay for the first time when I was 16, and then I came out as trans when I was like 19 or 20, and I'm almost 40 now, which means that my entire adult life has both been not just identifying as some kind of queer, but also intentionally surrounding myself in mostly queer and trans communities. So I am the sort of like rhythms and traditions that might make up an average heterosexual life are largely unfamiliar to me, and I just don't know how to write about that.
I'm a sociologist and theologian by training. Before I came to this country 27 years ago, I worked as a journalist in my country, Malaysia. So I'm a non-fiction writer. I write about religion, sociology, spirituality, and Christianity.
Thank you all so much. So my next question has a little bit of a long introduction just to give us some context. So according to CNN, over 500 anti-LGBTQ laws were introduced in the US last year. It's only February, right? But it already looks like the number of bills introduced this year will exceed last year. The ACLU is currently tracking over 400 bills in state legislatures, and many of the proposals include parental rights bills that empower parents to get books they find questionable removed from local schools and libraries. According to PEN America, there were over 3,000 instances of book bans in the US public schools and libraries last academic year. So this question is more for Kyle, Vicky, and Adriana, but Boon, you're also welcome to answer. Why do you think proposals like this have proliferated recently?
I'll go ahead. That's a big question. In two words, money and power. I think that the number of books that we have now with LGBTQ content are proliferating, but I do think this is a historical issue that has gone back to the 70s. I grew up in the 70s with Anita Bryant on the TV. We've seen this, Jerry Falwell in the 80s going after, Ernie and Bert and Tinky Winky and all those kinds of things, going after the idea that we're going after children, and it raises a lot of money for a lot of people. And it's interesting, the American Library Association just released their 2024 Rainbow Book List, and in doing so, they said we had 450 books this year to review, which is a lot of books. The more that we're out there with our books, the more of a target we become. But again, it goes back to that idea of creation of a panic among people that we're coming for the children, and how can we profit and benefit from that.
I mean, I think about the reason why I started writing romance. I have always written, and I had like a couple of like hidden manuscripts and like a secret file for a long time. But the first time I said I want to write, I want to see my book published or romance published was literally like 2 months before the 2016 election. And it was a way of giving myself therapy, because I was working a human trafficking program in New York City, and I am a bisexual, Black, Latina immigrant. I came to this country when I was 23. And the narrative around immigrants in this country was so toxic that I literally had to write a happy ending for like Dominican people just to get through my workday. And so, like, the fact that I am writing stories with queer Black immigrants who get to have a happy ending without trauma, without them having to go through harrowing experiences to earn a bright future, I think is something that kind of flies in the face of a lot of what is happening right now in terms of culture. And there was a time, I grew up in the 90s, where I couldn't find a book with queer people getting happy endings, getting to have like amazing sex lives and just meeting, falling in love. I didn't have that growing up. It was after I was like a full adult that I got to read that. And I think now that's there, and it is, I think, an affront to what a lot of people want to perpetuate in terms of what our lives are like. And for me as a Dominican person, given like the culture in Dominican Republic, where there's still a lot of misogyny, where there's still a lot of homophobia, it's important to me to write those stories. And it is, I think, something that really is difficult for people that want to see us in a narrative of like despair and so I think that's part of why it's proliferating, because I think now my 15-year-old who's queer can find a book with two girls falling in love and, going to prom. And that's not something that, like her having that certainty is something that is going to fly in the face of what a lot of people would like our lives to be like.
I think that this question could be answered by any one of a number of different theories or historical events, each one of which could be its own like dissertation topic. So I cannot here provide you with a grand unified theory of why this is happening now, because that is the project of historians, God willing, looking back on this time. But so when my first trans-themed picture book came out, or just before it came out, I was working as an elementary school librarian. This was in 2019, and I went to my boss and I said, hey, just to let you know, that I'm trans, that I wrote a book about this trans kid. did you know that there is some potential for negative backlash? Like, there's a possibility that if the wrong journalist or the wrong activist finds out that this book exists and that I wrote it and that I'm working at this school, we could easily go viral. Like, I could get death threats, you could get death threats, who knows? And I kind of presented it to him in this like relatively like light way, even though I was taking it very seriously. And that was to protect myself and also to warn him. So I knew back in 2019 that all of those things did happen to the authors of books about trans and queer kids. But 2021, January, February of 2021, is when, for me, I noticed it change from what felt like individual incidents in individual communities into a more mass movement that feels like astroturf, like it feels propped up from behind the scenes by like political actors who are not really showing their face. And as to why, I think there are a lot of reasons. Like, one reason could be the larger American political Christian dominionist movement, which is, you know, trying to turn us into a theocracy. I think you could also see it as just one of the many ways in which culture both progresses and then there's a backlash, and then there's progression, and then there's backlash, which, depending on where you stand, what I see as progress, you might see as backlash, and what they see as backlash, I see as progress. There's a New York Post article from a couple days ago that I got a Google News alert for, where the journalist wrote something along the lines of, do you remember back during COVID when you found out what your teachers were teaching your children? And I do think that the increased surveillance that teachers and then children are now under because of like learning from home and COVID also can't be discounted as part of this. And then third or fourthly, and then I'll stop because I could keep going, I also think it's really interesting to notice how visibility and oppression are actually linked. It's common to talk about visibility like it is a uniform good thing, but we also know that if people don't know that you exist, they're not going to pass laws making your existence illegal. I wrote a piece with a young trans friend of mine where we talked about how he feels like visibility both lets him know what is possible for him and also is making the idea of a future feel impossible. And that's a very complicated thing to hold. Those are complicated things to hold simultaneously.
Thank you all for those answers. What I'd like to do now is just to bring Boone into this particular conversation. So Hunter College boasts a diverse student population with many students first or second generation immigrants from countries outside of the US, where books featuring LGBTQ experiences have also faced bans. And your book, as we've talked about, as I mentioned earlier, faces a ban in Malaysia. So how do censorship experiences in places like Malaysia differ from the United States?
Yeah, I think these are very good questions, and I think the censorship is very different in the sense that in Malaysia or in many countries in Asia, the book is banned by the government. It's not like here; it's banned by the library, banned for some school, and those organizations that don't have the official imprimatur of the government. So it's different because you don't have freedom of speech and freedom of expression in many countries in Asia. Like in Malaysia, if you don't have freedom of speech and freedom of expression, and I think they are two very important because they are the guarantor of freedom of action. So you don't have freedom of speech, then you just don't have the right to assemble and don't have the freedom of association. People can't even mobilize to do something. And it sends a very strong message to the people, especially when you talk about LGBTI people, that this is really wrong and it's an abomination. Of course, many countries, for example, like China, they don't believe in Christianity, they are atheists, so they don't talk about God, but at least this is something unnatural, abnormal. So it perpetuates, they don't have access. For example, like in here, even though the book is banned here in your school, but you still can find the book. The school can stop you from publishing your books, right? But in Malaysia, the government will stop you publishing your books. And my book was banned, and I appealed, and then I have to find. Not only that, my book was banned. I have to pay 5,000 ringgit. That's the fine. 5,000 ringgit is like almost like $1,500. So and then I appealed. I won the case. So when I won the case, the government have to pay me 10,000 ringgit. But when the government appealed, they won 2-1 decision. Then I have to pay 1,500. And today I just learned that the federal court in Malaysia, which is the Supreme Court, they refused to take my case. So I have to pay now 30,000. And 30,000 is about like 7,000 US dollar, which is not a lot here, but it's a lot in Malaysia because regular people only make like 5,000 a month. So now I have to pay 30,000. So I think my book cannot be seen, cannot be sold, cannot be owned in Malaysia. If you have my book, if they purchased my book before, they have to destroy it. Otherwise, if the government found out that they have my book, they have to pay 20,000, and then they have to face jail time 3 years, up to 3 years. And then the publisher also will face something like that. So that is very, very serious. So in China, also the same thing. So Malaysia is a little bit better because, okay, the government banned my book, but they still have access to some other LGBT books that haven't been banned by the government, written by foreign writers. But in China, there's even worse. You can't have foreign books. In China, every book must be approved by the government to be sold, to be seen in public space. So, and because of that, people do not have knowledge about homosexuality. That's why, according to research, sociological research in China, at least 70 million women, they have no idea their husbands are gay. Because when they have homophobia, this is the thing about homophobia. It doesn't only hurt gay people, it also hurts straight people. When we discriminate against gay people, you only force gay people into heterosexual marriage to hide their identity, right? So that's why 70 million women in China have no idea their husbands are gay. So this is not only a gay rights issue, this is a social justice issue. It's a social justice. So I think it's very important. It's very different. So that's why, as much as I feel sorry for the book we have banned, but I envy, I envy the writers in this country. And of course, the censorship problem is a huge problem now. And I think one of the reasons is, I think, because people here, I still see myself as an outsider, even though I came to this country 27 years ago, and I became citizen 5 years ago. And of course, one of the reasons I became citizen is because I want to vote Trump out. And and it's because I think people here, they no longer cherish for the First Amendment, the freedom of speech. Most people take it for granted, or they only fight for their own freedom of speech. I think freedom of speech should be all, including regressives, right? But these days I see a lot of freedom of freedom of speech is for me, but it's not for you if you disagree with me. But personally, I would say I don't think any book should be banned. Not LGBT book, not even anti-LGBT books.
Thank you so much for that answer. So what I'd like to do now is just ask all of you about your specific experiences of censorship in a little bit more detail. So first, we'll start with Ariana. You were recently featured at an event at the New York Public Library on Latinx representation and empowerment against censorship. And you also write queer Latinx romance novels, as you've also explained. So can you tell us more about some of your experiences with censorship? Are there any issues that are specific to books in the queer Latinx romance genre?
I mean, I think with adult books is different because I think what is concerning about the censorship is that it's escalating more and more. So I think the books that are being banned for kids, I think, are then kind of like stopping them coming up into adulthood and like engaging with stories that are about like adults having like healthy queer relationships. So I think that to me, it's like that's the concerning piece of it. There are some states where romance is considered pornography. Like last month, a friend who is Latina was opening a bookstore which is specializing in romance novels, and she had to fight in court to open it because they were banning it as if she was selling pornography. And so that's concerning because that piece of any kind of book with sex in it then is going to be considered pornography regarding of what kind of book it is. So that is something that I have seen more and more cropping up, where like that line between, you know, there's like that saying, like, porn, you know it if you see it. Apparently not anymore. So, and I think it's part of this, I think it is so much like the visibility piece. I think romance is having a huge moment right now. Just romance reading after the pandemic has exploded. And so the pockets of people that were reading, I think romance has always been kind of like a secret club, where like people are reading it, but no one wants to admit they're reading spicy books. But now like reading spicy books is a lifestyle. And so that piece of it is where I see that, even within romance, I think books are getting wider and straighter. Like I think 5 years ago, romance was in a moment where a lot of queer books were coming out, a lot of queer books about with people of color were there. There were more trans authors writing romance, you know, books with open door sex scenes, and it was a great like leaps. We're like taking literally leaps in terms of representation and diversity in romance. And like in the last 3 years, there's been just like a surge in popularity, and the most popular books are like wider, straighter than ever. And I think again, it's that piece where like you kind of take 2 steps forwards and then like you take like 10 back. And so I don't know what that means for romance, because I think we were going in such a great direction, and now I think it's a lot more conservative than it's been in a long time in some real ways.
Thank you so much for that. So this next question is for Vicky. An event featuring your debut children's book, Molly's Tuxedo, which features a gender nonconforming child at a children's elementary school, was recently canceled. Can you tell us more about this experience, and specifically about soft censorship, as well as any other experiences you've had since then?
Sure, yeah. I feel like I'm at the opposite end of the spectrum of some of these folks have a million books out. This is my first book. It came out in June. So it's been out 8 months as of yesterday. The book, Molly's Tuxedo, it came out at the end of June in the summertime, so school was out. So I started with lots of great independent bookstore events and book festivals and Comic-Cons and things like that. And then September rolled around and school was back in session. So I was super excited. My local Indy has a nonprofit arm, and they were graciously set up a school visit for me on National School Picture Day, which would be perfect for my book, which is about a gender nonconforming girl who wants to wear a tuxedo instead of a dress, because what's more cool than a tuxedo? And so it was going along swimmingly. We were about to, it was like a day and a half from the event, and it was suddenly canceled. And basically, we were told to come collect the books, and we asked to reschedule. Can we donate the books? It was a Title I school, but that was not to be. So the reason why it's a little bit different from a ban, as I understand it, is a ban is once a book is purchased and put on the shelf, and then is challenged, and then it's pulled off the shelf, that's a ban. Whereas soft censorship, which is, by the way, happens to so many LGBTQ plus authors. I am definitely not the first. It's been happening for years, and it basically just means that it sort of happens off the books. So I just happened to sort of find out about it and understand that that's what was happening. But lots of times, authors and illustrators don't find out about it, or they're asked to come speak on 2 of their books, but not that third one that has 2 mommies or something. But the result is the same. It's not happy news for the author or illustrator or publisher or bookstore owner, and then the kids don't get the books. So that's the bad news about it. And I think about it a lot, how it impacted me personally as an author. I feel like I have a thick skin. For talking about ages, I came out at 15 in 1980 in the Deep South. Okay, imagine that one. So I've been out for a really long time. I have been, active in the community my whole life. I thought I had thick skin, but this one really hurt, I really lost heart and did not plan any school visits last fall because I just didn't. And I will say that comes from a place of privilege. I have a full-time day job, so lots and lots of authors and illustrators really depend on these school visits for income. But I just didn't plan any more school visits. I did book festivals and things like that. So it has a real impact all across the board on all of us. And it just means that, there was a meeting and someone said, what books do we want to bring in? And you might not ever know this, but your name might be crossed off the list, or the title never written down because they don't want a record of it. Or you don't know if it's because a parent, has been harassing them at school. And by the way, parents' rights groups, I'm a parent, and so they do not represent me, so it's kind of a misnomer to call them that. But I will say that this month I did 4 school visits. Lambda Literary has an LGBTQ Writers in Schools program here with New York City Public Schools. And I see what I'm missing out, because it was really, really incredible to read to those young students and to talk with them about what makes them feel good about themselves and who they are. So yeah, that was my experience.
Thank you. So next we'll go to Kyle. Now, your book, Call Me Max, was featured in Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' campaign to censor books and curricula that address gender identity and expression in Florida schools. So can you tell us more about this experience? And why do you think books that feature transgender and gender nonconforming children are being targeted in particular?
Yeah, so that experience that you're referencing was, on the one hand, relatively mundane. Like, nothing happened to me. It happened, but it didn't really materially impact my life. But what happened was, one morning I woke up and my Google News alerts were a mess. And the reason for that is because Governor Ron DeSantis had been on stage signing the Don't Say Gay bill, and there's a picture of him pointing to a spread from my book, Call Me Max, on stage with him. And in a red banner on, I think, the top, it says, "Found in Florida." So there's a picture of that man pointing to my book as if it is some outside invading contagion that is coming for the innocence of his state. Like I said, that did not materially impact my life. I don't live in Florida. I'm well supported by friends and family, but I'm also a Jew whose great grandparents moved here from the shtetls in 1902 or whatever. And so all of their voices were yelling in my ear that man knows your name and you do not want those men to know your name. So while it did not impact me materially, it definitely affected me spiritually and emotionally, just knowing that he knows who I am. I did not enjoy that. And then what was the second part of your question?
Just if you can, why do you think books featuring transgender and gender nonconforming children are being targeted in particular?
Okay, that is its own dissertation, but I actually wanted to loop back around and actually say that I lied. It is incorrect to say that did not materially impact my life. By that I mean I wasn't immediately loaded into a train car or whatever. But similar to Vicky's experience, I've also noticed a sharp and distinct decline in school visits and invitations and opportunities like that. Especially given, and this sounds like such a brag, and it's not. It's just an honest recounting of my resume. I won a Newbery Honor. I was the first trans person to get a Newbery Honor. I was a National Book Award finalist. I have 2 Stonewall Awards, and I was an elementary school librarian for 8 years. Every time I do a school visit, there's always some group of kids who are with each other. And then I say, "Oh, friends, I need to pause your conversation so I can hear what that person has to say, because I have classroom management skills. I know what I'm doing." And the fact that I am getting very few invitations to talk to the age of students that I worked with professionally, that I have a master's degree in for almost a decade, also means that authors who are in a similar position to me, who do not have quite those same accolades, are having an even harder time And that is what I find even harder. Like, I know how it's affecting me materially and financially, which is not insignificant if your books are illegal in a state. It means that they are not selling well in entire states, which means that you make less money from them, which is bad. So I lied. It does affect me materially. I just meant more sort of like big picture than like immediate. But then as to the question about like why are books about queer? I don't know. Like, why wouldn't they be? I mean, we know the history of gay things, right? Like, we know that it's been like a thing for a while in most places. Like, I don't need to go through like LGBTQIA plus history from like prehistory to now. We don't have time for that. But I also think one theory that I'm like slowly working on is this idea that there is this idea of transness and queerness as being an adult thing, both practically, it is a thing that grown-ups do, and also as a euphemism, as in like, it is, especially like transness is a kind of like degeneracy. It is something that belongs in the shadows and on the piers and in the back rooms. It is something to be seen on like scandalous news reports and on Jerry Springer, but it is not a thing that you want in your home. And it is not something that you want for your child. And I think that people doing like work like what we're doing is saying, actually, trans people have families and trans people have babies. And sometimes trans people realize that about themselves when they're 5, 6, 7, or 8. I don't want to do a like respectability politics thing here and say that all trans people are like God-fearing, upright citizens who would never do anything bad, because like that's not true. We're people who do all kinds of things and have all kinds of lifestyles. But I think that it is seen as especially threatening when something that has this long history of being like emblematic of like perverseness and degeneracy is then infiltrating like the sanctity of the home and the sanctity of the child. But that's, again, a dissertation, and I'm not in academia, so I will not be writing that.
Thank you so much for that. And so this last specific question is for Boone. So as we've already discussed, your book, Gay is Okay, A Christian Perspective, was recently banned in Malaysia, and you're currently in this legal struggle to overturn the ban. So can you tell us more about Gay is Okay, what the book is about, why it was banned, and the circumstances that led to the ban, as well as your advocacy work in Malaysia?
Okay. So the book was published in 2013. So they banned the book in 2020. So it's 7 years later. So it's very weird. And one of the things is because I published more than 30 books in Malaysia, but every one of them I wrote in Chinese. So this one I published in English. And Malaysia have 3 major racial groups: Malay, Chinese, and Indians. And Malay is 65% of the country population. Chinese is about 20%. So it's minority. So that's why they can't care less about my Chinese book. So, but why it took 7 years, there's a different story, right? But I will tell you later if I have a chance. So they banned my book, and basically this book is about, I have 2 parts of this book. This book has 2 parts. The first part is about homosexuality 101. Something very, very simple, because Malaysia, we still have sodomy law. So what they're trying to say is we need to repeal sodomy law. We got the sodomy law from UK, just like the United States. United States get rid of sodomy law, Supreme Court 2015, right? Texas case. So so we still have sodomy laws, and sodomy is so ridiculous on so many different levels. Because we got it from our colonizers, because it's a religious law, because the purpose of sex is for procreation, it's not for pleasure. So any sexual behavior that cannot lead to procreation is against nature. That's why oral sex, anal sex are against nature. Everyone guilty of this law would be in prison up to 20 years. So, and that is this law is about. But this law is not only about gay people. It's about straight people too. Straight people cannot have oral sex and anal sex, heterosexual people. And then, but it's nothing to do with lesbian, only gay men. And then, but interestingly enough, gay men, when you have oral sex and anal sex, only the top is guilty, the bottom is okay. Because it's about the owner of the penis. So that's why lesbian has no penis. That's why that's androcentrism, right? If I'm not there, I don't know what you both are doing. This is not sex, right? This is totally sexism, right? So in my book, I argue about this, and I talk about gay is not a mental illness, it's not a form of mental illness, it's not objectivist disorder, it's not intrinsically evil. So this is what I talk about, and talk about research about homosexuality, and I tell my own story about my life journey, right, in the first part of this book. And then the second part of this book is more technical, because it's about Christianity from Christian theology. And I recognize that there are some Christians are anti-gay. So and then the way they're anti-gay, they always use 6 to 7 scripture or passages from the Bible to go against gay people. Depends on how you count them. So I listed out all of them, and I provide different interpretation, alternative different interpretation. So I try to say that we have to look at the historical context within which this scripture were written, or these passages were written, so that we can understand what the writer trying to say, right? And then we should not, even if the Bible is really anti-gay, we should not impose our religious belief on other folks. I think it should be a common sense. So that's basically what I'm trying to do in this book, right? But they banned this book, as I said before, and then I won the case in High Court, I lost the case in appeal court, and then finally the Supreme Court today, which is federal court in Malaysia, they refused to take my case. So this book is banned for good. It's banned for good.
I'm sorry to hear that. But thank you so much for sharing your experience. So we have time, I think, for one more general question, and then I'll turn it to the audience for questions, and then if we have, depending on how that goes, I have some other general questions I can ask as well. So I think there's this common perception, at least that I've read in news media, about banned books, that once your book is banned, it like flies off the shelves and you start selling out of your book. But what I've read an article where Kyle is quoted, where you mentioned that's not the case, that there's actually a lot of negative impacts of bans, and especially on sales. And we've mentioned some of those here as well, but I'm wondering if any of you can expand on why it's so problematic for you as an author to experience a ban.
Just like quick numbers game. So Call Me Max sold for an advance of $2,500 back in, I think, 2018. And that was bundled with the 2 other books in the series. So total of $7,500 for 3 books. Those came out in 2019. They've been banned many times. I've gotten tons of press. My Google News alerts are a mess, but then also like my Twitter is full of people saying, oh, I'll buy your book. Like, I'm gonna get it from my kids. And those books earned out this royalty cycle, so 4 years later, and I finally received a check for $87, which is the opposite of best-selling.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was sharing earlier, we were having this conversation earlier, that in romance, I think it's the inverse of this. The books that perhaps have queer characters or whatnot, and that are receiving bad press or perhaps banned, kind of just like, there's one thing is like romance is, there's so much romance. Like the market is so saturated, and romance authors write very, very fast. So like your average romance author is putting out at least 1 book. Some are putting out 4 books a year. So it is quick. There's a lot of books. What I've experienced and observed is that the books that have a problematic theme, like for example, a hero who is in the KKK, those books then experience like a surge in sales. And so that's been my experience. And the books that, for example, have like a Black trans woman, those books kind of like get a ton of bad reviews because no one can relate to a Black trans woman, and they kind of just dwindle and linger and don't sell. So that, I think, in romance is like the opposite. Like the worse the book is, the more it sells, and then like the more intersectional the book is, the less like people seem to be able to connect to it.
I guess we can turn it to the audience now. Does anybody have any questions for the authors? Yeah.
Hi. First of all, I want to apologize on behalf of the state of Florida. But I guess my question is the knowledge or understanding that the topics you're writing about, like the fact that that might be banned, does that discourage you from writing at all? Does that kind of change your perspective? I guess the speed at which you might produce or write your stories, your books, anything that you're creating?
I have a novel coming out next year, and there's a scene where like the Jewish trans boy main character smashes up some guy's office with a baseball bat, just because I'm tired of having polite conversations with people. No, but that's, again, I don't know what else I would write about. And also, I just don't care. Like, why would I appease them? Like, why would I do their job for them? I'm far too stubborn and far too, I'm like conflict averse, but also very combative in other ways. So no, I hate them. Why would I do that?
I wholeheartedly agree. I can't imagine writing anything else, and I've just been who I am for so long. I can't imagine caring what anybody else thinks about it.
No. I mean, I think, my job is to write books about Black, Latin, queer people getting unapologetic happy endings. It's my mission statement. It's the reason why I started writing romance. I have no interest in writing anything else. And again, I'm coming from, I think it's like being a romance reader is something like, it's literally a personality. And I've been reading romance since I was 12 years old. And the first time that I read a book with a Dominican queer person was the book I wrote. And so to me, the job is to keep putting those books on the shelves, and whether a large swath of the romance readership can't connect to them because they can't envision connecting to a Black person who's queer and from the Caribbean having a happy ending, and yet connects to werewolves or vampires. That's fine, because I'm writing for readers like me.
One more thing. In fact, I write because of it. Because I mean, this particular book that I have out right now, I had seen a couple of news articles where a very young girl and a high school girl had both been bullied or harassed by their peers or adults about wanting to wear pants or a suit instead of a dress. And I mean, I was like, are you kidding me? I've been dealing with this for over 50 years myself. I just have a picture of me wearing my brother's suit when I was 5 years old. And I had to sit down with all those feelings and write it down to make myself feel better.
So I want to say thank you all. I'm a middle school teacher. I teach at a country day school in Brooklyn. And I am here to represent my students because the next book in our curriculum is Kyle's Too Bright to See. They have not read it yet. When I told them I had to leave and dismiss early because I was coming to New York to hopefully meet Kyle, they were very excited. And I'm a teacher who have been teaching for 20 years, and as a graduate of Teachers College, and I know that Kyle's an alumni of Barnard, it's important to me that I have windows and mirrors. And so I regularly update my curriculum so that my students feel that they are reading about experiences that they are having. And one of my students, I'm most confident, is really gonna be able to embrace this book because I believe she is going through a passage where she is very much like Kyle's protagonist in the novel. But more importantly, aside from including in the curriculum books of this nature, what advice can I give my students, and how can I help them navigate this world in terms of understanding that I'm not the only person that can support them? Are there resources to your knowledge where young people, and also this includes you, Vicki, we have a lower school. I'm gonna try to get you to come to speak at the lower school because I have plenty of students who are the peers of my younger daughter who most certainly would really be able to connect with your characters. What can we do as educators and also as parents?
I'm not in the, I don't like giving advice if I don't know like a person's particulars. Like one could say like, oh, like tell your parents, but some people really shouldn't tell their parents. I wish that I could answer your question, but I prefer to give advice when I'm actually like talking face to face to a person and know more about like who they are and what they need. But sort of generally, like the general advice that I give is like hang out with other queer people. And then I give like also specific advice to like trans masculine people, which is to like know and love trans women. But I don't know. I mean, there's resources, they're on the internet. I'm sorry.
I would just say in general, too, I agree with that, find your people, right? And you'll grow up and find more people. But I mean, isn't there a statistic or a fact that it only takes one supportive adult in a child's life to really save them? That was the case for me with teachers. So what you're doing right now is amazing, and keep doing that.
Hi. First of all, I thank you to the teacher who just spoke. That was very inspiring. And also inspiring, I heard about the Brooklyn Library that is making a library card available to any child, I think middle school and above, anywhere in the country. So my question is, because I don't want to leave here depressed, where have you come across pockets of resistance or kind of solidarity for the work that you're doing, especially in those states and in those locales where so many of these bans are happening? Like, where is there hope?
Well, I think there's a lot of hope. I mean, personally, me as an author, I get private messages from families, parents, teachers, librarians, people who say, I know the perfect child that needs your book. And so I get a lot of support in that way. In terms of pockets of hope, I mean, there are national organizations that are doing the work and putting the work in. There are statewide organizations that are just amazing that are putting the work in. Follow them, like them, send them money, or whatever to help. Because there are people smarter than I who are paying attention to all the details and helping to support authors and illustrators like us.
I mean, every time I hear that my book has been banned or challenged in some place, I'm also always immediately connected to queer and trans and allied people in those exact same communities who have been living there and doing that work since before my books came along. We know that there's no such thing as red states or blue states. There are people living everywhere, and there are different organizations and communities and belief structures everywhere. My oldest trans friend is from Florida. He's having a hard time right now, but he's been a gay person in Florida for 30 years, and he has his community and his friends and his family who are also in Florida with him. So yeah, the hope that I get is knowing that we are everywhere and that there's people doing the work everywhere, even if I'm not personally connected to them.
Well, I'm a Christian minister, so I also practice Zen Buddhism, especially Zen meditation. So for me, spirituality is very important. I believe in God, I believe in love, I believe in hope as a Christian. And so I think, I believe everything happens for reasons. And when things happen to me, I don't usually ask why this happened to me. I always ask why this happened for me, how this could be used for my ministry, for my work in Asia, especially in LGBTI Christian activism. And I think I'm very privileged to be able to live in this country, to witness the struggle and the movement and activism in this country, and to understand that everything comes with a price tag, and you all have paid the price. And then, but a lot of people in Asia, we just started the movement. The first LGBT center in China was opened in 2008. So, it's very just a new beginning. And then I'm the only public figure that have come out publicly in Malaysia, right? The first and only. So there's so many work need to be done. So I feel like all these obstacle challenges, and then we learn so much from feminist movement, from civil rights movement. So all these things give us hope. Of course, there are obstacles, there are challenges, but we shall overcome. Just a matter of time.
I think we have time for one more question. In the back, yeah.
Thank you for this amazing panel. I wanted to ask what you thought about two kind of strands of thought that seem somewhat at odds in the panel and maybe in the culture. One is that the idea that we should all practice sort of radical empathy, right? We should practice radical empathy for other races, for other religions, right? That's very important. And then there's this idea about who has the right to tell our stories and who has the right to speak as whom and who has the right to write which stories. And I guess I wondered, I mean, I've heard sort of two things. So I've heard people talk about like, yeah, I write as a queer person. I write queer characters because that's who I am. And then there's also this tension where when people say like, oh, like, you know, some readers can't relate to a, you know, Dominican protagonist. I'm like, psh, practice radical empathy. Like, who cares? You can't relate. It's a fiction book. It's about, you know, it's about empathy. It's about getting into other perspectives. So I guess I was just wondering if any of you would be interested in reflecting on that tension and about, like, do you wish a bunch of straight people were writing queer stories? Would they screw it up? What's the role of empathy in storytelling, I guess?
I mean, in adult romance, there's definitely a lot of straight people writing queer stories because romance is just really, really big, and there's just a lot. I would probably, yes. So that's a thing in adult romance. I mean, it's like, this is a conversation we have all the time. You know, authors have private chat groups where they talk to other friends who are also of their like intersecting identities, and we kind of like just vent all the time. I mean, I think romance specifically, and I've always said this, I think the superpower of romance is that it is the perfect place in fiction for you to dive into an identity or an experience that isn't yours, because you are guaranteed a happy ending. So it's the perfect place to read about something that perhaps you have never known about and haven't experienced, because you know no matter what happens in that book, the two people will be okay at the end. So I think romance is the perfect place to explore identities that you perhaps have no experience about, queer identities, other races, other ethnicities, cultural moments, historical moments. I mean, I think the piece of, I mean, in terms of queer stories, I think specifically in romance, it's a constant conversation that queer romance should be different than straight romance. Like, it is a different kind of story because of the identity and the experience, and there's found family and finding your people that perhaps is not something that is essential to a happy ending between two people who are straight. So I would say, I mean, I don't think it's useful for me to censor who can write what story, but I do think that romance specifically is a place where if you are willing to try it, it is kind of like the easiest place to engage in radical empathy, because you know it's gonna be okay at the end.
I don't have like a dissertation-worthy answer to that right now because I know that we're like running out of time. But one weird fact is that the best kids book with a major trans character written by a straight cis person that I've ever read is one of the books by Rick Riordan, the guy who wrote the Percy Jackson series. Before then, I was like a fairly hardliner about like, no, like cis people shouldn't be writing trans characters because I always do a bad job. And then Rick Riordan did a fantastic job. I still don't know how he did it. But I do know that he taught middle school for a very, very, very long time before he turned to writing for kids. And I know that in the speech he gave when he accepted the Stonewall Award that he won for that book, he talked about how his entire speech was about all the children that he failed in his career, all the kids that he did not properly support because he didn't know how to, and that he carried the knowledge of that failure with him and wanted to stop failing children in the future. And I think that's a really interesting way to look at empathy. He's not doing it from a perspective of like, I want to do this because it makes me feel good. He was doing it because he knew how badly he had done in the past and he wanted to not continue to make those mistakes in the future. It's wild. That book was like a life-changing experience for me. But then also, as to the question about like who can write what, I've kind of stopped arguing about that because like people can do whatever they want. I don't get to tell people what to do. I can say that I don't like this book and that I think you did a bad job, but that doesn't mean that you don't get to do something. I'm not the boss of you. I tend to look at it, again, from a more like material perspective. Who gets to make money from their art? Who gets to have a book on a list? How many publishing and marketing dollars are going to different authors, and in what ways is that inequitable or disproportionate? I sort of stopped litigating who can do what, because people can do whatever they want. It's more a matter of how are your choices materially impacting yourself, your community, and then people and communities outside of you. So that's what I try to think about.
Well, I think there's a very interesting question about who can write what to whom. I'm not sure what I'm going to say now is the answer to to your question. But I think your question is really good. It reminds me about something about identity politics, right? And then we all know that we construct our perspectives because of our social locations. But human beings are very complicated. Not all women experience the same thing. Not all gay people experience the same thing. That's why intersectionality is so important these days. And because social hierarchy can intersect with other with gender hierarchies, and we're going to see very different things. So as a gay man, it doesn't mean that I really understand gay world. Even if I understand gay world, but because I can take everything for granted and that I'm not able to see something familiar strange. But as an outsider who live in margin, or if you are not gay person, but maybe you can see something that I fail to see, because we all take things for granted. We are not able to see something familiar strange, right? And once you are not able to see something familiar strange, it's also very difficult for you to see something strange familiar. And that's why I think identity definitely is important, but we also have to, I don't think we need to so caught up with identity politics, right? As if only we know the truth and only we have the right to say certain thing about certain group of people.
All right, so with that, I think we'll start ending the event. I have to say, I think this is one of my favorite panels that I've done here. I think probably just because, I mean, so yes, for sure, thank the panelists. Everything you had to say was just so powerful. I think it's also just very refreshing. We usually focus a lot on policymakers. This is one of the first panels we've done that have brought in people that are directly impacted by the policies. So I want to thank the panelists, and I also like to thank the CUNY LGBTQ Advisory Council and its president, Mitch Drazen, as well as Roosevelt House Director Harold Holzer, and all the staff that made tonight's event possible, like my program assistant, Annabella Pritchard, the Roosevelt House Curator of Public Programs, Mac Barrett, our production coordinator, Daniel Colkin, our communications and electronic media manager, Erin Lee Feynman, and the Roosevelt House Administrator, Peter Sclafani. I always try to mention specific people. Thank you all so much for helping make this event possible. Just before I end, I wanted to note a couple of upcoming events that we have. First, we have a TGNC Know Your Rights workshop. This is for all the students in the audience. I see many of you here. Thank you so much for coming. And this is going to be on April 8th from 2:30 to 3:45 p.m. And it'll be led by someone from CUNY Law School Sorensen Center. We're also going to be having an event on Ken Sherrill's impact on LGBTQ politics in New York State. Ken Sherrill was the first openly gay elected official in New York State and passed away this December. We don't have the exact date for that one yet, or another event we're working on. We're hoping to have an event on violence against the LGBTQ community that will reflect on the killing of Next Benedict sometime this spring semester as well. And then to end on a positive note, the Pride Policy Fellowship application is open. So if you're a student in the audience who would like to have research support for a research project on LGBTQ policy issues, or is going to work in an internship that's unpaid on an LGBTQ policy issue, the fellowship comes with a $5,000 stipend. So please do apply, and the deadline is May 1st. So with that, please join us for a reception upstairs, and thank you all for coming to tonight's event.